Good afternoon, everyone. So it's a pleasure welcoming Dr. Nafis Faizi for an interactive session on difference between conversation, discussion, and dialogue. Dr. Nafis Faizi is an assistant professor, cum epidemiologist at the Department of Community Medicine, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Jawaharlal Nehru Medical College, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh since 2015. Except for a few months when he worked as scientist in Indian Council of Medical Research, National Institute of Malaria Research, ICMR-NIMR. As a faculty, his primary teaching areas are epidemiology, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, sir, global health and health systems, health policy, essential medicines, and demography. Besides his interests in public health and community medicine, his policy engagements include health systems and antimicrobial resistance, primarily through democratizing global health initiative and antibiotic resistance coalition, ARC, respectively. You're welcome, Dr. Nafis. You have up to 2 hours for this session, and you're welcome to conduct it however you like it. So over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Bazad. And please forget whatever he has said as an introduction, because I'm in no way going to talk anything even remotely related to that. However, this is where I come from, and therefore my examples will have those leanings, and I'm not trying to withdraw myself from it. I also have a presentation, which I'm not very proud of displaying, but for the sake of our conversations being on a template, I will try to share that particular screen in a moment. And then yeah, so I think the screen is visible now and I'm audible to everyone. I'm also audible, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes, sir.
Fair enough. So before I even start, I will start with the fact that there is no conflicts of interest to declare, as we always do in our presentations. I do come from a very different background, and instead of, and I would be happy to bring that particular perspective, but instead of hard philosophical underpinnings, as the other scholars at India Log do, can effortlessly bring, I won't do that. So I teach community medicine or public health and epidemiology, and my experiences in community interaction and certain examples will come with, and that is given non-disclosure. Before I start, this presentation will be very non-conventional and will take formal liberties as well. So I'll be talking in 5 parts within this presentation. The 5 parts are very loosely connected, but they are also separate in their own right. So that is how it's going to be. So let's move over and start with the first part, which is the box. Now, what I intend to do here is, as you all can see, this is a box. Now, what is in this box? We don't really know. And then this is not meant to be Kant's box, so I'm not going to talk about any kind of philosophy or anything like that. I'm just simply saying that this is a box. Do we know what is in the box? Is it empty? Is it full? Okay, the present. Has it ever been filled by anything? If yes, what could it have been? What is there? What is not? We don't really know anything, even when we see a particular box. Suppose you were living inside this particular box. And of course, that box would be far bigger than the one you're seeing. If you're living inside the box, are you sure that the world outside is safe and secure for you? Once you know that there is a world outside this box, will you take some time to adjust to the fact that the outside world is safe or secure for me to come out or not? Or do we really know from the outside that people who are living inside this box are really living a miserable life, as one would say, because, you know, in children, we talk about safe spaces. What if people think that they are living under a safe space, and we are hell-bent on trying to tell them that come outside the box because the world is wonderful? So my only intention by showing this particular box is, in essence, this box is a metaphor of our internalized identities and our perspectives, together with our insecurities that come with it, whether you're inside or outside. With the box metaphor, I also intend to keep a few questions that I asked in your mind as we proceed towards the next 4 parts of the presentation. Remember, we do not know how people feel once they live inside the box. And for the ones who are outside the box, it's not necessarily a very bad place to be if it is considered as a safe space. With that, I enter the second part of my presentation, and politics of knowledge. It sounds big, I know. However, as I said, refrain from connotations and talk about the easy. So this is in winter, the group of health workers. We were talking to a lot of people. We were discussing things with them. We had we had excellent posters, very personalized photo. And we had an excellent presentation on why tobacco is bad, why people should leave it, and nobody should take in tobacco, and in the form of smoking or smokeless. After that, an old woman in her 70s stood up and asked a question, that if tobacco is indeed so bad, why doesn't the government ban it instead of you spending so much time with us? So this is what happened once she asked this question. We had no idea how to respond to it. How do you respond to a woman who knows? We could have discussed how law works, but that was not the point. The point here is that we came for a discussion and not for a dialogue. The woman already knew that tobacco is bad. Probably she didn't know the details of why it is bad or how bad it is, but she knew that tobacco is bad. Now, what happens here is the discussion was why and how smoking is bad, how can we leave addiction, and so on and so forth. Now, by raising this question, the lady exposes the whole pointlessness of this particular discussion. She's interested in the same thing as we are. But it's action, projecting it towards law. She frees the other hand. We, by not engaging in the form of dialogue, have separated ourselves from why people actually smoke. How have they internalized or justified smoking or taking smokeless tobacco in their own lives? So in the 4th part today, we will discuss with the problem with this basic approach itself. But that is what happened, I still remember 10 years ago. Now, and this has been the subject of developmental economics for a long, long time, which brings me to this quote from a friend and mentor, Dr. David Sanders. In his book, he quotes Zafarullah Chaudhary saying that, from Bangladesh, that who are these experts who come from thousands of miles away with a perfect plan for a village they've never seen and a culture they've never lived. Now, this helicopter development, this helicopter research, this helicopter discussions are becoming some sort of a big problem in the development sector right now. And now they are opening up to what should be actually a dialogue with people and understand why they live in a particular way, why they think in a particular way, and their identities. So is about politics of knowledge. Now, as health workers, we approach people with our set knowledge and a standardized convention of things. And so there is an alcoholic who has been drinking for the last 30 years. Who knows more about alcohol? We think we do. The one who's been living with alcohol for the last 30 years knows less than us about alcohol. Shouldn't there be a dialogue? And this is the question that frequently is being popped up now, instead of a mere conversation, discussion, or debate about how alcoholism is. And such an approach has led to the foundations of lay epidemiology, where we are now saying, and it's only upcoming, that the process by which lay persons gather statistics and other information and marshal their knowledge and resources instead of the experts' resources to understand the problem in their own settings. Now, this is a very radical part of epidemiology that is still in its infancy. But the moot point is that the affected communities, people who are living with a certain experience, they should be allowed to say what they are witnessing and how to get rid of this, or change our understanding of that whole particular thing. So there are two big reasons why this politics of knowledge or lack of dialogue among people about their lived experience is irresponsible, as well as, it's so parochial and narrow-minded. First, that it is condescending and patronizing. We think we are helpful, but we have this feeling of superiority, which is at times insulting to people, and now people recognize this. Second, it suffers from profound tone deafness, which the dictionary is very well mentioned as, we have this obtuse insensitivity to the problem itself while discussing with the people who have a lived experience of that particular stuff. So that's how politics of knowledge, especially in sciences and medicine, has been a problem in terms of people's experiences. Which brings me to a very powerful saying by everyone's favorite, Reverend Cornel West, where he mentions that dialogue is basically based on this criterion of truth. And the condition of truth is to allow the suffering to speak. Instead of allowing the suffering to speak, it doesn't mean that people who are suffering are the only knowers of the truth, but it means that the conditions of the truth to emerge, for them to emerge, it must be in tune with those who are undergoing the social misery. And it is not necessarily about misery or suffering, or, it's about any phenomenon that a person is witnessing. And when that suffering speaks, when that particular identity speaks, there must be a Socratic dimension that brings critique on one hand, and then the part of the dialogue says that, are we willing to enact and embody the best of who we are by actually giving them by sharing those understandings and reevaluating ourselves about it. So from the box, we've moved to the politics of knowledge a little bit. And before I actually go to the last two parts, let us actually, hold on, talk about the third part, which is the difference. Here, what I'll do is this is only meant to be a leveler. To bring us on the same page, I would be discussing what debate, discussion, and dialogue is. And the intention is not to give you the difference between them in essence, but the understanding on how these three differ as a mode of communication. So we'll just briefly glance through the difference between a debate, a discussion, and a dialogue. Discussion is, in a way, a synonym of a conversation. We all know that. As nouns, discussion concerns a particular topic, whereas conversation is about exchange of individual ideas through talking with other people. Dialogues are more akin to exploration. Debate is a form of discussion, and this is something that everybody knows. So debates are usually about either or might is right. Discussion is about noisier, the smarter, the more perspectives. But the perspectives here are merely for the sake of placement, that, hear this person out, hear that person out. And there is this placement of these perspectives on one pedestal. Whereas dialogue is the only one that is truly collaborative, in the sense that the placement of those perspectives is under the influence of mentioning, and therefore dialogue is the only collaborative element, has the collaborative element, whereas discussion at best can be contributory, whereas debate is always conflicting. Now, because it is conflicting, debate is usually about assertion of one particular point or idea, and therefore it is close-minded because you have to assert your own particular agenda. You don't change through the process during a debate. In discussion, there is this assumption of equality that, there are 5 people coming from very different backgrounds, very different identities, but, I'll give them equal time to understand or equal footage to understand, or, to assert their opinions, to say their opinions. In a dialogue, we recognize that identity. So there is no brushing under the carpet of equality. We are not under this false illusion that everyone is equal, and we don't even need that, because we are here to dialogue. We are here to recognize that identity, recognize that perspective, and give value to it and understand it. So this is where it differs. Now, since the endpoint, therefore, even within the process of this assertiveness, the other party tends to get submissive in order to end the debate, or at worst, or maintain composure at last. So with assertion comes, submissiveness of the other party, whereas there is introspection in dialogue. Now, this introspection is very important, because emotions are given value in dialogue, not in debate. Now, when you give value to emotions in debate, in fact, emotions are often belittled also. So there is active otherization in debate, and even in forms of discussion, where the emotional responses are present, but they are either belittled, or those emotions are seldomly named, or sometimes it's unwelcome also in discussions. Dialogue, since it is introspective in nature, it actually values emotions and builds on those particular emotions. So that is where dialogue differs. In a sense, debates are conclusive, whether you agree with it or not, whether it affects any change or not, it is conclusive for the sake of it. In discussion, the focus is content and not effect. So, you don't really say that it is concluded or not, or whether it will make any change or not, because only the content or perspectives are in discussion. Effectively uncovers understanding of people. The focus on re-evaluation as an effect, requirement are far more data. This is where in dialogue's contribution, for example, and become extremely important, as we'll see in the final part as well. However, in the next part, we'll talk about what could be and what should be the requirements of this formal process of dialogue. What could be the conditions or prerequisites, if any, for dialogue to happen. Which brings me to Freire. Given his sharp, and this is the third part, given his sharp and vast scholarship, I must declare that I have a very limited understanding of this gentleman. Paulo Freire has expounded profoundly on dialogue and considered its vital importance in education, although I would reserve my points to the prerequisites of a dialogue, and who better than Freire himself to understand this. Now, so Freire, in sense of education, he said that there is a freedom in dialogue, whereas anything that is anti-dialogue is oppressive, which our current system of education is, according to his purview. And the dialogic character of education as a practice of freedom does not begin unless the teacher-student meet with the student teachers in a pedagogical situation, where rather than the teacher asking, what should we, rather than the teacher submitting his or her requirements or information in students' mind, ask the students what should we dialogue about, and even then, only then can we brought about. So talk about priors. So we quickly go through the 5 main horizontal relationship building exercise, where love, humility, faith, on the basis of those foundations, dialogue becomes a horizontal relationship in which mutual trust and between the dialoguers is a logical conclusion. Let us quickly see through those 5 elements through Freire's exact words. So number 1 is humility, and Freire, and I quote, people who lack humility or have lost it cannot come to the people, cannot be their partners in naming the world, and dialogue cannot exist without humility. In essence, this humility is lost in most of the, even the public health addresses that we do, even to this date. Even the most, aware or woke people lack this humility because they come from a certain pedestal. Instead of trying to understand values, where it's a pathology. That was humility. Expect nothing to come of their efforts. Their encounters will be empty, sterile, bureaucratic, and tedious. So, and this, in a sense, happens to most of the communications that are being undergone in the developmental sectors these days, because they come from an air, and that's why the humility is gone. And most of them is a message put across for the sake of putting across the message, and not change. And therefore, most of these messages are empty, sterile, bureaucratic, and tedious. Third is faith. Now, faith, unless and until there is faith in those people, even before meeting them face to face, it's very rare that we are going to have a good dialogue with them, or any dialogue at all. Finally, love. And then Freire very beautifully put this at if I do not love the world, if I do not love life, if I do not love people, I cannot enter into a dialogue. Because the basic foundation of any change or understanding or valuing emotions comes from love itself. So if there is no love, or if I've lost that particular love, then it's almost impossible to enter into a dialogue. The other thing is, the last is critical thinking. And where he said that only dialogue is capable of generating critical thinking. And he mentions that in a very vivid sense, where he talks about, that critique can only be understood if you hear the people who are from a particular understanding, who are from a particular pedestal, who are from a particular sense of belongingness, and they tell you that why you are wrong, or why you might require a change rather than anything else. So critical thinking can only be found if there is a proper dialogue. So Freire expanded on these and basic, foundations for a dialogue. I also talked about banking concept of education, where communication has been replaced with, placement of information, where he profoundly said that the students have become the depositories and teacher is the depositor. So instead of communicating, the teacher communicates and, deposits the information which the receivers or the students have to patiently receive, memorize, and repeat. And there you have a bank with you. And this receiving, filing, and storing of deposits is the only meaning that is left out of education. There is no dialogue per se. Nobody asks, where are you coming from? What kind of problems or adversities do you have? What identity do you come from? Can you share those identity or belongingness perspective with us? There's never a time for all this in that sense. So in essence, this brings us to the last part on dialogue. In the first part, we discussed about the box. In the second part, we discussed a little bit about politics of knowledge. In the third, we talked about the difference between debate, discussion, and dialogue. In the fourth, we talked about Freire's, prerequisites for a dialogue to happen. And in the fifth, or in the last part, we would be discussing why dialogue is essential now more than ever, and why I think, by not only me, I'm a mere student of that particular understanding, why people all around the world have been expounding on the need and this culture of dialogue to develop as soon as possible to get out of this quagmire that we are in. So this is 2017. So in 2017, 4 books came out very quickly, and many articles, many op-eds, many writings across newspapers. Too much ink has been spilled to understand this new age of anger that we are living in. The current wave of populism, the rise of authoritarianism, the rise of binaries, and many binaries. One set of people believing in many kind of binaries. So there was this article by in Project Syndicate by Anir on Rage Against the Elites, discussing the 4 most popular books of those times. Now, my intention is not to discuss why this is happening, but what I will try to do is we will try to understand how dialogue is the fundamental reason, or means to achieve the aims of the rage, people who believe in this particular rage. So in the Great Regression, which is a set of essays edited, Arjuna Padurai, Pankaj Mishra, and many people have written. So Bauman writes about how the stimuli to engage in a dialogue is aimed at reciprocal recognition, respect, and bona fide understanding. So there is a recognition that the stimuli that propels you to engage in a dialogue is basically aimed at reciprocal recognition, respect, and bona fide understanding. But all this is dying out, and this dying out process is getting completed now. And that's how he expounds upon and says that death of a dialogue is fueling this rage. So now what happens is that this particular stimulus has been made to die out for a particularly long time. Some people say, it's because of the neoliberalism. Some people said that this is the mass education that is doing it. My intention is not to go into the reasons on why, but it is very convenient to, to kill this stimulus to engage in reciprocal recognitions, and for this rage to continue and be, have this perpetual perennial essence. And for that, dialogue has to die, and the stimuli that can lead to a dialogue should also die. And this is what people are actively working on across the world, and this has happened. Now, Bauman also quotes Pope Francis, and Pope Francis gave a wonderful speech about 9 years ago, where his speech was on the emphasis of the culture of dialogue. And I'll quote him word by word, because it's a profoundly important sentence, where he said that an integral part of education imparted in our schools, cutting across disciplinary lines and helping to give young people tools needed to settle conflicts differently, accustomed in an environment where we settle conflicts with power, whereas this has to change across multidisciplinary teams. What we have to teach is what we have to generate is a culture of dialogue. Unless and until we do that, this regression will not stop. This rage will not stop. Now, Pankaj Mishra also wrote the particular book, Age of Anger, where the book is mostly about anger. And he goes on to emphasize how dialogue and solidarity, the foremost qualities that separate humans from other predatory beings, invites sarcasm in this regime of privatization and commodification and deregulation. Again, my emphasis is not on what has led to that, but my emphasis is how dialogue as a process and dialogue's prerequisites need to be killed for this rage to continue. And this is extremely important. And that's why dialogue today, and this particular session and more sessions like these, where we start understanding the very important value of dialogue, the foremost quality that separates us from predatory animals, should be recognized. Now, apart from these 4 books, let me go on to in this regard, my favorite is Michael J. Sandel. And in The Tyranny of Merit, he writes profoundly that the more we think of ourselves as self-made and self-sufficient, the harder it is to learn gratitude and humility. And without these sentiments, it is hard to care for the common good. Now, see the connectivity. Now, when Freire says that there are prerequisites for a dialogue, the more you think about the prerequisites, the more you understand how valuable humility and gratitude is. Now, and once we have killed that gratitude and humility, different angle, Sandel has given some key messages. And I'll go to those couple of key messages. But before that, it's important to understand that the common goods destruction today, the common goods destruction is intertwined by the failure of dialogue as well as its prerequisites. That is the bottom line of the essence with dialogue. However, actually change to contributive justice. The liberals all across the world profoundly talk about, distributive justice and how representation should be there, and how equality of result is extremely important and is an end in itself. So while equality of opportunity is important, thinking of it as an end in itself is a bad meritocratic project, and this overshadows the moral problems of inequality in itself. So that is one of the message, that how distributive justice should now change to contributive justice. And two, why inequality is not the fundamental problem that we have. The rise of inequality is related, and this is Sandel's idea, that is related to the meritocratic project, where it's not merely inequality, but this feeling in people that, we deserve this success or we deserve this failure, by creating this aura of how merit should be valued. And for dialogue to happen, this needs to change. Critically, there are two things that are a problem here. One is, and they are, they are the ones because of which humility is never reached. The situation, the prerequisites for a dialogue we never come to that point. And number one of this is the credential prejudice, that, I competed through an entrance, or I got through this profound wisdom in business, and now I've become a big businessman, and therefore I deserve to be rich. And there is a hubris attached to it. And you could not qualify through an entrance or a competition, or failed at business, or something might have happened, and you deserve that humiliation. Now, this particular understanding creates the credential prejudice. And people think that and this is profoundly humiliating, in the sense that, even in autocratic times, when you were poor, you knew, or when you were poor, you knew that, you have no role. It's mere luck. I did not really contribute to my poverty. But in this meritocratic project, what is happening is that the poor are not only poor, but every day they have to live with this particular fact that, they are somehow deserving of this failure, when actually they had no part in it. So that is the credential prejudice that comes with it. The other is the technocratic conceit that we have, which I began with in the second part, when we approached that particular woman, telling her that smoking is bad, and how that in medical wards, there are 3-4 questions that we ask, which gives us pointers towards the background of that particular people. So we ask, for example, are you a long distance trucker by any chance? Or, where do you live? And we see whether there is any connection to, HIV AIDS related habits. So we tend to overthink of that. And this is perfectly fine in our books of medicine as well, that, by asking certain questions, you attach that background geography to the risky behavior that people might have. Just think about it for a moment, that, this is called, educating people in stereotyping and discriminating against people. And then we do not stop at a moment and ask why this particular behavior perpetrates in that particular society. So the technocratic conceit says that, The experts know, you don't know. And the people who are below us, who could not qualify in the meritocratic project, they do not deserve dignity. So there's no dignity of work in, in so-called, even the skilled professions like, for example, sanitation. So there's no dignity. We'll talk about emotions and why it is important. And, this needs to change. And therefore, I think that Michael J. Sandel is profoundly on point when we talk about tyranny of merit. So those are the only 5 parts that I wanted to show by means of a presentation. I'll just conclude so that I can finish with this presentation and discuss things with you. So in conclusion, what did we talk about today are these 5 parts. 1, we talked about a box. So the mere sight of a box, and as through the example of a box, what I tried to portray is you do not know whether a person living inside the box is in a safe space or not, or whether the world outside that particular box is really good or safe or not. Unless and until you know that, you cannot, and you are in no position to actually talk to that particular person about which is good and what is bad, because you'll have to ask that particular person. And here dialogue becomes important. On the other hand, if you are living outside the box, you must go and visit and try and understand. And it is upon you to understand that particular phenomenon of the box that, and for both these interactions to happen, dialogue is absolutely essential. Then on, we talked about politics of knowledge, how, politics of knowledge has fundamentally impacted the way we interact with fellow humans. The way I'm interacting with you, the way you interact with me has that politics of knowledge. And, it has profoundly affected the pedagogical standards everywhere. Education has been turned into a very different kind of discourse. So after politics of knowledge, we discussed the difference between debate, that there are prerequisites for a dialogue to happen, and that dialogue is the only collaborative means of conversation that we have today. And it is it has its own prerequisites, after which we went to our 4th part, where we discussed Paulo Freire and the 5 prerequisites for a dialogue: hope, faith, humility, love, and critical understanding. And through Freire's statements, we know that these 5 human, emotions or human values, either they are lost in our conversations, and therefore we have a discussion and not dialogue, or we do not believe in them anymore when we approach certain people, or we go with a fundamental understanding of those people without even seeing them. And that's why, one of the clearest example of inequality is that based on race or caste, where the kid is not even born, and you suddenly decided certain things about that particular individual. It's not yet born yet. So the only discrimination that can be given to an unborn child, if that is the kind of feelings that we have deviated way out from those 5 prerequisites. Finally, we discussed the huge importance of dialogue today as the only means to get out of the current situation that we are in globally. And by this, I don't mean governments, I don't mean politics, but I mean fundamentally in the way we communicate and the way we discuss and solve our problems. That has hit a roadblock. And unless and until we start dialogue as a means, and we spread this culture of dialogue, this rage against the so-called elites or this authoritarianism will continue to be fueled, and we'll continue to talk in terms of binaries. So this is where I'll end. The final words are that dialogue is a means to end mutual conflict. I never understood why it is mutual, but this mutual conflict or reciprocal distrust that we have between individuals can only be changed to a mutual understanding of some sort, a mutual wisdom and a mutual strength of some sort, if we start the process of dialogue. And in that particular sense, dialogue is an ambitious and an audacious project. and absolutely critical to our times. With this, I stop. And I hope for an engaging discussion or comments or questions from all of you and learning from all of you as well. So this is where I'll end my presentation. Yeah, fair enough.
Thank you, sir. It was a brilliant presentation, very precise and to the point. And it's good to hear it from a medical doctor itself. You know, that's a refreshing experience, I think. So we open the floor for questions and answers or discussions. Anybody who wants to ask a question, please click on raise hand first and then go ahead. Zishan, Zishan, go ahead.
Yes. Good afternoon, sir. I hope I am audible.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you so much. As Behzad sir said, yeah, coming from a doctor, it means a lot. So actually, my question is pertain to that. Like in medicinal ethics, even in philosophy, when we talk about, we also talked about in doctor-patient relationship. We tend to talk about how it has to be dialogic. And in dialogic, there is a conflict between whether the treatment should follow the prognosis of the patient's interest or it should be on the doctor's interest. So, sir, can you throw some light on this, that where to locate that interest within this dialogue between patient and the doctor?
So the two things here. One is when we say doctors, it's a very wide arena that we're talking about. So when we talk about preventive field and public health and curative, they're completely different from each other. That is the first thing that we have to understand. So if you are sitting in an emergency, the modality of those ethics change, you know, and then the is seldom present in that particular situation there. So in the emergency, I'm taking out of this particular picture. But in curative medicine, in a doctor-patient relationship, it's profoundly changed now, but it's changing now, but often there is no dialogue in the real sense. There is no dialogue. There is this set of patients who have come up with a problem, they spell out their problems, and then there are ready-made solutions that are in a doctor's mind, and they are given to these patients. More often than not, they don't even think while prescribing on whether this prescription is apt or not. I'll just give a very simple example. One of my interns, she was advising this woman who had her first baby on, why don't you breastfeed? And, breastfeeding is very important. And she gave all the 10 steps on how you should breastfeed and, what are the modalities of doing so? What are the problems that you might have? She's actually brilliant and she gave a very good advice. But in the end, when I asked the question that did you really ask this woman on what she does, basically, what is her work? So she said, yes, sir, she's a maid. So I said, and how many houses does she visit? And are these families really, allowing her to bring her baby with her? She said that, no, sir, I didn't. Now, this no, sir, I didn't comes not from a wrong place. You always do not get the time to actually inquire or enter into a dialogic process when you're sitting in an OPD, especially in low and middle income countries where the OPDs are packed. But that's not an excuse either. So that is about more of the curative medicine part. In the preventive medicine part, if they are not engaging in a dialogue, they are coming directly from developmental sector, from World Bank primed education, and God help us from that kind of doctor-patient relationship, which is very often seen in vaccination and other fields also. So yeah.
Thank you.
Pragya?
Yeah. Thank you, sir. The last answer was quite nice. I have been suffering from allergies since almost since 2014, and most of the whenever I consult a new doctor, instead of understanding, they just directly I mean, I think it's not even the listening part. They just basically just prescribe antibiotics, or they just give me vitamin C to improve my immunity. So that's something which, I mean, that's something I have been talking about. Anyways, my question is related to, the new age of anger, which you mentioned. And what we have experienced in while trying to have dialogue is that a lot of times the other party is maybe not as willing to come in a dialogue, because they are experiencing anger, or they so there's a lot of reluctance, and even if they sit at the table, mentally they're not in a dialogic framework. So how can we maybe make it easier, or how can we diffuse this tension? Is there something we can do to kind of make the environment more dialogic in the case when there's a lot of anger in at least one party? I mean, I understand that, and we are willing to sort of do something on that line. Is it something we can do?
I don't know, Pragya, this is an extremely difficult question, and maybe you're better at it than me, because the kind of anger that we are currently witnessing is huge, and I've been trying to understand this also. So when the pandemics began, that was the prime question that was in my mind when I was talking to one of my friends, who is Bezad's friend, also Irfanullah, that what we usually think that this particular pandemic, this particular problem will unite us, and there'll be social cohesion, and there'll be solidarity, and any bad thing will lead to growing solidarity and things will improve. Well, I'm sorry, but even pandemics are actually highly divisive, and pandemics are also used as an instrument to further divide people. So we know that during the 14th century, when there was this big European plague pandemic, most Jews died not due to plague, but due to the almost genocide. Nobody defined it genocide, but it started in Netherlands. They started killing the Jews and pinning blames on those people that, the rice bags that they have changed has brought this plague. It's related to their festival. I'm not going into those details. But what I'm trying to say is, even during times of pandemic and problems, social cohesion breaks down, and there is such a spite of divisiveness that I don't know. The only thing that I have come up to, and has been very loosely successful, is that you and me can ask these people to vent out their anger and speak, at least speak whatever you're saying. After 5 to 10 minutes of whatever you're speaking, maybe you will change. But entering into a dialogue, maybe Bezad would know more about how to enter dialogue with these people. I am totally incapable of really understanding this particular phenomenon. No. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Furkan.
Hello, Dr. Faizi. Thank you for your lecture. There was some interruptions, but I tried my best to understand your speech as long as I can. Yeah, thank you. My thoughts and the question is actually going to be about your box metaphor. It was actually a nice metaphor, but first of all, I was gonna say, in my opinion, it is really hard to actually convince someone if we feel that we are out of the box. And it is really hard to convince someone that he or she is in the box. And it's also kind of quite impossible to, take them from the box to the out. And that's why I was thinking, like, we are kind of all living in a box, but it's just the size of the box, but we are living in a bigger box. And what we see actually, who is living in a box, is just living in a smaller box. And that's why it's also kind of the third thing that I'm gonna ask you. It's probably the better approach. Is it a better approach to maybe wait for them to jump out of the box than just cutting one side of the box and just make the box bigger for them and for us? Like, is it kind of, I was just gonna ask you, like, how do you think about this box metaphor if you actually look at it like in that approach?
So the reason I used a box is because it is bounded on all four sides and because we are not looking outside it. So the first thing is opening the box and looking outside. And then we have to realize that whether the four boundaries that are across us, and we have set those boundaries, can we expand those boundaries? Can we expand this particular box? And it is up to us to understand within our identity, within our securities and insecurities, on where we draw these particular boundaries. Unless and until we know that, I mean, it's very difficult to understand. So this brings me to who will create the boundaries of this particular box? Who will decide where and how to get out of this box? The people who are living inside have to actually decide that. And even if you are willing to help the people who are inside the box, if you think that that is a problem, the first thing that you have to realize in your own self is that, is it really a bad place to be? I mean, and this is something that has come up now, that I'll be very frank with you, that when I was in, so I worked as a scientist. After 7 years of academia, I joined as a scientist at a particular place in India. And there I realized that our mandates are completely different. And it was terrific. I was reaching the pinnacle of excellence in terms of research. But I realized that this particular box is not meant for me. I want to expand myself and do more than this. Maybe even even if it is not reaching the pinnacle of success. So who decides whether or not to come out of this box, and how do you decide it is entirely upon these people. And this is where dialogue really comes in, that, on developing a perspective about it. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Charu?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, you are, Charu.
Thank you, sir, for an amazing lecture. So my question is in regard with the pedagogy in the current education system. You mentioned that the students are at a depositories and teachers are the depositor, which I totally agree with. So do you think that like, how can you accommodate a dialogical discourse in, first of all, because every classroom has a massive amount of students, so a teacher cannot particularly concentrate on every single student, and that's one of the reason. And second, do you believe like, what are your views regarding the fact that I just believe that the relationship of teacher and student have been traditionally defined as hierarchical nature. So do you think that that hierarchy is somewhat also prohibiting dialogue in terms of the classroom setup and the basic nature which we are we believe in?
Definitely, that's probably that's excellent, the question that you pose. Of course, hierarchical nature is definitely a roadblock to that. And the fact that you mentioned, and this is something that people came up with, a lot of people come up with this particular understanding education, in the sense that it should completely change this banking system of education. Then you start thinking of engineering, medical sciences, and a lot of these things. And then you realize that the current world that we live in, mass education is completely different than education. And mass can only be educated, the kind of people, the number of people that we have can only be educated in a certain way. And that is the fundamental understanding to begin with. How I see this is completely different now. I used to see that, in a way that, somehow the educational system should change. That is only one step of the problem. The bigger problem is, why do we need so many master degree students? Why do we need so many research scholars? Why does the world think that education is related to employment only? And that is the biggest problem that we are currently under. This education-led employment has not generated any work. Economies have collapsed. It's only about finance now. So skilled workers are less and less in number. And we are not generating working classes. We are not giving dignity to the work of working classes. And that's a fundamental problem. I'm not saying this from a Marxist point of view at all. What I'm trying to say is that if for 8 hours, somebody is doing a wonderful job with my bicycle, and every time I go to get my bicycle repaired, I always think that this is a very meticulous job that this gentleman is doing. And after that particular job, he can only ask for 20 rupees. And then also his or her dignity is limited. And this is what educational system has done. It's not about education alone. How we change things in classroom is a completely different project, but it is related to this. No, we do not need so many masters and higher education students. We need different modalities of employment, and dignity should not be related to our levels of education. And that is an absolute fundamental that we have to come up to. That, my dignity is not because I can wear a tie or I have done an MD or a master's or a PhD. My dignity is in every work that I do and how beautifully I do a particular work. So yeah, I mean, that's how I think about it. Yeah.
Okay, so do we have any more questions or comments?
Sir,
Roji, yeah.
so I'll take this opportunity to ask a few. This is a very simple and very, I would say, very lame question, but I just don't want to miss this opportunity. So,
no question is lame. No question is lame ever. The one who has said this is lame actually. Whoever has for this, yeah.
Okay, so sir, my question is very simple. I have in India, we generally have many people who already knew that intoxicants are very bad, and they know exactly what it will affect their health, but still they are taking it. Is this my voice cracking?
No, sorry, Roji, please go ahead. But his mic was unmuted. Andrew, it is. Andrew, why is it muting and muting again? Andrew, please keep your mic muted. Yeah.
Okay, so sir, and I was just I just want to take your suggestion that many people have this tendency to take intoxicants, and in India there are such a pretty large number. And in my area also, I can see people who have been put in rehab, but still when they come out, they started taking again this, intoxicants or liquors. So what will be your possible suggestion to form a dialogic preposition with them so that they can understand, even though they are, still, even though they are put it in rehab center, when they came out, they started again taking these things. So what will be your suggestion, sir? I just want to know.
That's a difficult situation that in currently in India and many of the other countries. Two parts of it. One is that people who are engaged in such pursuits, do they need to come out, and how do they find the means to come out, whether they can go to coming out from the rehabilitative centers? How do you prohibit them getting into that same situation again? I'm sorry, this would take a while, but I hope I'm audible despite the azan going across me. So, yeah. So what happens here is community level participation and empowerment is considered very important. Now, what happens is that the community is still India are still not understanding the whole binary that Indian government has created. So in the ministry itself, there is a conflict between health ministry and social justice ministry of social justice and empowerment. Ministry of social justice and empowerment, contrary to their name, is that we should haul or any such pursuit. Okay. Whereas Ministry of Health says that what we should do is we should manage the risks. So if people are already taking any drugs or they're injection drug abusers, and we can't change that situation right now, justice would be to give them the means to understand this phenomenon, rehabilitate out of it, and while they are in it, they continue with safe practices. Now, there's a fundamental distinction at the ministry level also, where there is, conflicts in those. Now, why am I mentioning about the ministry level information is that the messages are not clear to our communities. And this is also related to Pragya's question in a way. Now, health systems basically should be accountable and answerable to people and not the other way out. What has happened is that we have a health system, we have a rehabilitative center and everything, where individuals go and seek, information or advice or treatments. They don't own the kind of treatment, advice and information that they need. So since there is no community ownership and accountability, we are often in a situation where an individual is made to enter a rehabilitative center, but that post-rehabilitative center, the community, since it's not even aware of the demands of a post-rehabilitative person, we just don't have the means to grow on those terms. Whether I was clear or not in this particular aspect, but what I'm trying to say is that the communities, unless and until they come up actively to understand the process of addictions and the process of de-addiction, there is no way we can help the number of people that are actually into addiction. So yeah, as far as individual advices are concerned, I mean, I won't even go on there.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Answer. There's a question in the chat box by Ravi.
Okay.
Can you read it yourself, or do I read it for you?
Yeah, and Ravi has asked the question that I would ask to Ravi also. Is the rise of authoritarian leadership in many parts of the world creating a world where dialogue is going to be a far side? So in conflict and reformation studies, there is this very fundamental understanding of conflict and reformation. And what they say is, unless and until there is a conflict, there cannot be a reconciliation. So the rise of authoritarianism is the breaking point, and that is what those 4 big books on, if you continue to see these in terms of dialogue. So since dialogue was broken down, since there was a tyranny of merit, since there is this expert bias, since there is this pathologizing of poverty that has been going on for the last 100, 200 years, it had to reach a breaking point. And this breaking point is the rise of authoritarian leadership. So if this conflict would not have happened, then the need for dialogue would have been, far-fetched even now. So what it makes, so how I see it is that, however difficult it is today, and that's why I said that dialogue is an ambitious and audacious project, but absolutely essential now, because these are the only means left in the current state of affairs to get out of this particular quagmire that we are in. So yeah.
Okay, so it seems we don't have any more questions or comments. In that case, we conclude this session here. Just last week, we had a poet delivering a talk on dialogue, and today we had a medical doctor talking about it. So it's a great example of how dialogue is not only for dialogue practitioners alone, but it is something that concerns and should concern everybody else. So thank you so much, Dr. Nafis Faizi, for your time and your brilliant presentation. It's really nice to know you and listen to you. Thank you, participants. I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you, sir.
So
Thank you, sir.
Anything that you'd like to add, sir?
Yeah. So I see Ravi writing in chat, are the Westerners to blame for it? And Ravi, so this particular phenomenon has been, and it's interesting that you say that, because Pankaj Mishra's book, Age of Anger, became very popular. But no, of course not. When you're pinning on blame on some people or some ethnicity, it's just that, it's not the Westerners. It could have been Easterners, for example. So it's not that, a particular geography has created the problem. It was in the thick of things, and it was the particular people in those. So what I'm trying to say is Pankaj Mishra has, in the whole book of Age of Anger, if you read it, you'll see he has expounded on the Western intellectuals from Rousseau to Voltaire to everyone, saying that, this elite intellectualism that all of these Western philosophers had has led to this anger. I do not completely agree with it. Most people do not completely agree with it. Many man of the moment or woman of the moment arguments come with philosophers, and that is with Voltaire as well, Rousseau as well. And, so I wouldn't pin down blame on a set of people from a particular geography, but yes, colonialism has been a problem. It started from the West this time. It could start from the East. So we don't really know. So yeah. And thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. See you.
Thank you. Bye, Bezat. See you.